Hey everybody, here's a painting I did today, and I thought I would just show it and talk a little bit about some of the process that I went through, some of the thoughts that I had. And so as you're looking at this painting, you can tell it's a landscape painting, I hope. And the other thing you can tell is it's primarily, real estate wise, it's mostly sky. And that's what was interesting to me today. We have beautiful spring clouds here in Maine, excuse me. And that's what I was wanting to capture. So I went ahead and put my hills in, and I made sure that they were below the halfway point. And so I was able to get mostly sky and some land. And one thing that you can't tell when you look at this painting is you don't know what the scene actually looked like. And I can tell you that that road that I have in there was actually in the scene, but I changed its shape a little bit and moved it to where I wanted it. In other words, I moved it so that it becomes a nice lead into the painting and then cuts you back this way. You see that little cut back there. That's what I want the eye to do. Come in here, see these trees, and if anything, kind of go back here, come back around these clouds, and then back down to these trees. So that's what we're supposed to do as painters, and sometimes I do it well and sometimes not so well. But the idea is to look at the scene in front of you from a designer's point of view. So your painting will be design-oriented as opposed to subject-oriented. And beginner painters, myself included, their consideration was for subject. Oh, I like the red barn, I think I'll paint the red barn. Well, there's nothing wrong with painting a red barn, or in this case, there's nothing wrong with painting these birch trees here. Okay, but I have to put them in a good spot in the painting. I have to find a place for them, and that place needs to be something that works well for the overall design. So one thing about these trees that I'll explain is that those were put in last. And the reason I did that is because they're quite delicate. You can see them. I laid them in with a palette knife, the edge of my palette knife. These are birch trees, and I laid them in with the edge of my palette knife loaded up with some white paint with a little yellow in it. And my process was to build the whole painting. So I put the sky in and the hills and the grass, and I put these green trees here, okay? All these ones that have a little bit stronger form to them. I had all those in there. And then I laid these trees on top, and my reasoning was because they're very delicate, and I didn't want to go in early and put a nice delicate gestural mark for the tree and then have to paint around it. So sometimes keep that in mind when you're painting. Something that's important may be left until later, but you're doing that knowing that you're going to put it in later. Again, in this case, putting it on top of what's there. And I think that works pretty well most of the time, especially for these delicate type trees. With regard to mark making, I've got a lot of brushwork, a little bit of palette knife. You can see palette knife here on this cloud. You can see palette knife right here as well, over here on these trees, and there's a little bit down here. So I'm using different tools to make different marks. Sometimes I use my finger to soften an edge. Sometimes I use the palette knife. Sometimes I lay the paint on with a palette knife. Sometimes I remove paint with a palette knife. There's no one recipe that works, but you want to have a variety of mark making. And the way I like to think of it is I like to have areas that are massed in. So like this, this part of the cloud here, this white cloud is a big massed area, right? So I like areas like that. The hill back here, that's a massed in area. And then I have more linear areas. So like these trees, even some of these marks in the sky, they have more of a linear stroke. Same thing down in the landscape. You can see some of these more linear strokes, okay? And then I have what I call dots. So you see these little blips of just little pieces of paint here and there. And I'm trying to hold the camera and talk and point at the same time. Anyway, you can see that. So I like to, in my mind, I realized at one point, looking at a lot of Russian paintings, that that's what I admired about their work, was there was what I came to call mass, line, and dot. There was a lot of that going on. So when you're out painting, keep it interesting with your mark making. Think about your overall design. What do you want to say? Is it about the sky? Is it about the land? And think about the process of laying down that paint. What will serve the painting best? Would it be best to lay something in later as opposed to earlier, even if it's an important thing? Like maybe you're going to paint a barn that you think is beautiful. Maybe you lay everything in first and then palette knife the barn on top so it sits really clean and clear. These are just thoughts about process. Remember, process is up to you. Follow the principles of painting, design principles. Follow, have a good order with your values, with your temperature shifts. Find a nice harmony, but do it in your own way. So anyway, this is a 12 by 16, and I painted this, I guess it took me about an hour outdoors, and I was happy with the feel of it. I was going for the feel. It was a little bit breezy, and we had these beautiful clouds that were kind of moving in and out across the landscape. So there you go. Happy painting, everybody.